think he risked? Some say, I will pay a goat. A goat? A goat. Some say, nothing. Some 10 days. And that's why we started pushing very hard the fight against impunity. Because this is the beginning. It's not the end, but this is the beginning. That you push and you say you cannot do it without price. And one is to fight impunity. Two is also we pushed very hard to have the conditionality policy, which is now the due diligence policy adopted by the UN, that the UN will never support war criminals in non-UN security forces. It started in the DRC, and we started with the rapist. And we said we will not support the rapist. We will not support the war criminals. We are the UN, we are here to help a country to build a rule of law institution, to protect human rights, to protect the vulnerable groups, and to fight impunity. And I think these are step by step, because we are, as I said, entering the individual in a sphere where in the past only state can speak. And you come to the very specific place where only state can interact according to their own interest and say, hey, here you have individual, they are your citizen, but they are protected by the international legal framework. You adhere or not to that, this is part of the protection that we can provide. And we put these people on a naming and shaming list. You put these people on sanction list, and you can refer these people to the code, but to the international code. But this is the international framework. But it's important to help a state to have its own institution, and that's when we talk about peace building. Building the institutions that are the core institutions that help a state to respond, to protect its citizens, to build a legal framework for accountability, and to protect its wealth, to protect its border, and to be fair and to be accountable to its citizens. So this is a long process, but I think that this legal framework, because how can I go and talk to a commander in an army if I don't have such leverage behind me? How can I go and say to a president, you have to do that, you have to take action against this general. I don't work with him because he did that, and unless you take action. These are the legitimacy that this framework gives us. So I would like you to understand that it's important to work, and the UN is a long process, but we went from far, and we will continue to strengthen what we get now. It's not perfect. Violation continue. I went to Syria, and I saw how the victims, children, women are suffering. I went to Yemen, and I think we continue to put the pressure, the international community, to get and to achieve that this stop.
Thank you very much. We get from there that the best way of protecting women is accountability. If men can do what they want and there is nothing for them after that, then they will continue doing it. So the issue of accountability, you know, we very often see protection women in peacekeepers, but the accountability, the jurisdiction is much more important in a way. If men know that if they do something, there is an accountability, and they could end up in the ICC. So think about protection in many different ways. I'm sure you want to add something. Yes.
Well, I think on the one hand, the accountability is one tactic, but on the other hand, what I mentioned earlier on about having changed the image of women in society, having women, and that's why this temporary special measure, this question of quotas, and having women in positions of power.
Yeah.
Surely, when you see, in I don't know, the DRC or places like that, when you see more and more women appearing on radio, on TV, and speaking on issues of economic and social importance, surely the image and the feelings towards women will change with time when women speak with authority and power. So I think that's why this temporary special measure, this quota thing, is multi-purpose, if you wish. On one hand is to get the minimum critical mass of women involved in changing legislation, in making legislation, gender-friendly legislation like land, like rape, like all these matters, but also to change the image a little bit in countries that might otherwise be viewing women and treating women in a way that maybe is not what is so desirable. But then the second point is, the second point about rape is, this is a terrible thing to say, but when you rape a woman in front of the husband, the father, the parents, if you kill somebody, you kill that person and it's over. When you rape a woman in front of their family and their children, you've destroyed that family. It's in fact one of the most effective ways, if you wish. The whole idea is to destroy your enemy. That there really is very little more effective ways. It's a terrible thing to say, but that's why it's resorted to so often as a tactic of war, as you would say. And it's not just in the developing world, It's also very part of the military culture. I'm just reading about the case of this girl in Florida, who joined the armed forces and was raped by her instructor, and she's only now decided to come out. And this is right here in Florida, 19 years old, and she was raped. Now she's reporting. So it's not just, it's unfortunately very much a part of a particular very macho culture, maybe a lot of times related to the military as well. And so there's no two ways about it. As you say, impunity must not be tolerated, but there must be also political will, and there must be a consciousness. We have to raise the consciousness. When I speak to a lot of, soldiers, like troops going on peacekeeping missions, when you talk about things like that, you just realize that really a lot of consciousness raising, a lot of training, awareness raising that we take for granted, that people are aware of, is not true. So this kind of training that we're doing now for all troops going on peacekeeping missions is compulsory. I really think it does work because people do realize that they had not thought of it before. It was something so casual, they had not thought of it before and seen it in this light. That it's just not tolerated.
May I think both our friends have spoken at length on some of the key issues that you've raised. But let me just address two things. One is, why do conflicts breed more violence against women and girls? That is one. The second is, what can be done and what should be done? So I think these are the two things, and what can be done by the UN in particular. So let me look at this causation issue. Right now the Commission on Status of Women is meeting. And the priority theme that it is addressing is ending violence against women. And one of the settings that are particularly targeted for purposes of addressing the issue of violence is the setting of conflict and post-conflict countries. Why? Because in conflict and post-conflict settings, societies are disintegrating and people are, families, societies, communities are dispersed. Law and order is often not in place, and there is more a climate of impunity for three categories of people, if I may just mention. One are the government forces themselves, combatant or law enforcement, because this is often the case, and that is true. You've been talking about yes. The second category are those that are engaged, the militants, you may call them, or combatants, which are the non-governmental forces, those that are fighting the government forces. The third category that are involved in such violence relate to what one would call those who are taking advantage of the chaos, those who are taking advantage of people not being in their homes, being IDPs, fleeing, being on the move, and not being in secure spaces and safe spaces. So, and it could well be antisocial elements as well, criminals taking advantage. So all of these factors, along with very systematic, and in the case of sexual violence, it is often very systematic, for the reasons that have been explained, systematic practice of sexual violence as a weapon of war being used by warring parties and combatants. And this is, it is very clear from the recent history of the conflicts that have been mentioned, and it's happening in Mali right now. And we are very concerned about that, and the UN is present there and trying to deal with this, prevent it, protect, provide protection, but also provide support to those women who have suffered this. So this is one would call the causation factors and the exacerbation factors in what we also call the continuum of violence. And that brings me to the other issue which Judy and our other friends have referred to, the issue of the context in which this violence has to be dealt with, and that context is in the gender inequality and discrimination that is there from the beginning, which then gets exacerbated in conflict and post-conflict situations. The social and economic insecurity and vulnerability, and what we call multiple intersecting forms of discrimination that then exacerbate both the impact, also the scale, and the propensity of violence. So this is what needs to be addressed as well when we are thinking in the context of violence. We are thinking of the 4 P's, which is protection. We talked about protection, and there in the context of violence we need to have a special attention when the UN is acting, or any peacekeeping force is acting, or even governments are acting. They need to be looking for early warning systems, patterns, places where these are going to happen. Then the other issue is putting in place patrols in sensitive areas. Then the third aspect, the second P relates to prevention, and it's very much linked in the conflict situation to protection as well, And prevention includes the whole series of measures that one takes to empower women, to provide them support, to integrate, help them defend themselves. I think in many of these situations, as you also highlighted, it's very important to raise awareness amongst women about the dangers, about the threats that may be around them, and how they can deal with those threats. And also in the long term, of course, there is a longer term prevention strategy that we call primary, secondary, long term, short term prevention strategy. Then the third P is prosecution of perpetrators. And in that context, we always talk about the issue of retributive and reparative justice for women and girls who have been affected by violence. And there, the important role of the transitional justice system is to be emphasized. And many UN agencies are involved in setting up this transitional justice system. And there, both the participation of women and making the justice system gender sensitive is absolutely a must. And that's where UN is working, both in terms of the justice system being made, but also the law enforcement system and the police, the reporting, the first point of reporting violence has to be also gender sensitive. So from law enforcement, peacekeepers, government troops, making them sensitive gender sensitive and and particularly attentive to sexual violence and violence against women. That is one. And then the justice system. And then the participation of women and girls, and particularly participation of women in these structures is absolutely important. That's why the 7 point. And then you bring us, and then we come to the other issue of provision of services, support services to those who are victims and survivors of violence. How do we support them? What kind of response services, hotlines, health, and shelters, and all the other kind of response services that need to be made available in the context of violence against women, including and particularly in conflict situations. So, it's all about, in the end, all of this should be seen in the context of the peace to development continuum. And I keep emphasizing this because in the development part, many societies and many countries like Rwanda and Liberia and others have tried to build back better. And Judy referred to this whole issue of special temporary measures. And these two countries today have the highest representation of women in parliament. So they have tried to rectify, in fact, a global deficit in some ways, and shown the way that in a post-conflict situation, you can and you should try to build back better and not go back and revert back to the inequalities and injustices and discrimination of the past, but in fact try to institute gender equality and women's empowerment throughout the governance system, but also in the judiciary, in law enforcement. I was being told how some of these now have judges and Supreme Court judges, women as many of them. So, this is the way to go as well. And for the UN, I would also like to emphasize what Judy said, that it's very important that UN's own conduct in terms of the troops who are operating, the peacekeeping troops who are operating peacekeeping, and also the civilian authorities that are operating on the ground need to be particularly attentive and particularly sensitive to dealing with violence against women, and also to gender equality and women's empowerment. And we have developed training modules together with DPKO and all our other sister agencies and DPA. And we are trying the training manuals, and there is also now pre-deployment training in troop contributing countries for those troops, because there is a sensitivity issue, as you were mentioning. Sometimes it's not even in their consciousness that this is an issue. So we need to bring that consciousness up. Also accountability by troop contributing country governments to the behavior of their troops on the ground, so that they provide the training, they give the warning, and when cases of violation occur, the kind of punishment that they met out, and demonstrative punishment, so that others know that this is off limits. So these are all, this is the ecosystem of measures that we have to take in peace building and peace and in conflict and post-conflict countries. And there are these indicators, as I said, there are some 26 indicators that UN-Women has developed for the UN system, 19 of them for the UN system, and the rest for member states. We are still in the process of refining them, but I think it has helped. I think these accountability mechanisms have helped, but of course not enough, because conflict is conflict, and you were talking about how conflicts are both fed by and generate these violent masculinities that give rise to extreme forms of degradation and violence and violation of women and girls in conflict.
Well, you all have explained to us that women are the victims of conflicts, that women are the builders after conflicts. Why is it that it is so difficult for women to be part of peace processes? Why do we have so few women negotiators? I must tell you that one student here came to me and said, do you think you could put me in touch with a woman at the United Nations who has been through a major negotiation? And I just looked at her and I couldn't find her name. This is just the UN, but when I think of the countries which are going through a conflict and a peace agreement, the women are affected by the conflict the most. The women will rebuild the social fabric of society. We know that they will do it more than the men, but they are not part of the peace process. And that peace process can be extraordinarily important for them. What is going to be in the peace process? So what is the problem? And why is it that the UN there has really not been able to make much progress? What's the issue?
I think that, first of all, war is a man effort. They are, yes, they are the men in uniform, they are the armed group, and they are the representative of the government. So when you start mediating, you mediate between those who are fighting each other. And what we would like to see different is what we are discussing. They are fighting each other, but the impact on those who are not taking part in the conflict is so high. Because now, and we see, I mean, sometimes because the war is in Africa, some sitting far from Africa will say, they are raping women, they are recruiting boys and girls because it's maybe their level of development, it's maybe the culture, it's maybe something. But we saw it when it is interstate conflict. It happened in former Yugoslavia, in Europe, in the heart of Europe. It happened in northern Mali, where I know the culture and the structure of the Tuareg, for example. They never give a gun to someone who is not already adult. So war is for adults in their culture. So they don't allow children to be involved in war. But they did it because of the nature of the conflict. And that's why when we talk about the influencing, the mediation, and to say that women must be part of the mediation process, and we are pushing for that, and we are fighting inside the UN. Because don't forget, we are in a male society, even inside the UN, everywhere. We are not the majority. We are, I mean, I think that the number of women that are at our position start to grow with thanks to Mr. Ban Ki-moon, to the new SG, who insisted that women need to be part of the leadership of the UN.
How many special representatives are there for peacekeeping operations women now? Two?
You mean SRG too, but
More.
There is Sudan,
South Sudan,
Liberia,
and then
Liberia.
no, there's another one. South
there are
Sudan,
15
Liberia.
peacekeeping operations.
It's
Yeah.
way too low. It's still way too low, no question. Yeah. But the number of women,
But
senior.
GSRG we have.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
but the number of women in senior management
Yes.
positions that report directly to Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the SG, if you
That's
check the
correct.
website, has actually gone up to more than 40%, more than 42%, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. If I can just, because I want to switch the discussion to that. But before that, I wonder if
May
you
I?
want to add something
Yes,
on the mediation
I
side.
would indeed. You know, apart from what you mentioned, yeah, I always half seriously but half jokingly, I always challenge when we talk about the culture of peace and the culture of war. I refer always to the UNESCO founding document, which says that war begins in the minds of men. And I always point out that, you know, women are the peacemakers. But, as has been pointed out, because they are not the belligerent parties in most cases, nor can they be spoilers, you know, nor are they parts of any breakaway soldiers groups or breakaway political militant groups. They are never taken seriously. And yet, women are at the heart of important peace movements. You've seen that in Liberia. So there is this irony that they are not included, although their talent, their propensity for peace, I always call it that, is so much to be tapped. But it is not done for reasons, and we have tried. We have tried in Afghanistan. You know, so many peace talks have been held, and every time we end up with having only some 2 or 3 women's groups being at the table, and that too mostly as observers and not. So the responsibility is also on the international community, not only on those who are trying to broker peace, not only on the UN. And the statistics, you know, it's amazing. Since the end of the Cold War, women have averaged just 7% of negotiators in formal peace negotiations. And last year, the average was brought up to 9%, thanks to 25% representation of women on the Philippines government negotiating team. And by the way, the head of that team is a woman, and she is heading this Philippines delegation at the Commission on Status of Women. So I was talking to her, and it is fascinating because she said, you know, they included us because they felt that we could influence the women amongst the communities that are involved in this conflict. And also that we could have we could present a more neutral kind of role, we could play a more neutral role in this conflict, right, in bringing about peace. So there are this issue, but we have also, I mean, the UN has also not appointed any, never yet by the UN, we have never appointed a woman mediator or special, and a chief mediator, for example. So I think all of us are guilty. But what we are trying to do, the UN, but particularly UN Women, we are working with many